It's chilly here in Hot Springs, at least as chilly as it's been since I've been here. We're getting down towards freezing at night and the 50s in the day. So I am trying to hustle and get the rest of my garden beds dug before winter really sets in. And so I'm going to go out after I do this recording and get some free leaf mulch from the Hot Springs compost facility. But before I go, I wanted to introduce an idea, and this is just going to be a short video, but just sort of food for thought about galls. And as I mentioned in one of my last videos, my friend Sean in Washington sent me a care package of the dandelions and gourds and seeds and garlic and a gall. And it's kind of one of those synchronous things, because how often do we talk about galls? Not often, but it happened a few days before. A friend and I were corresponding, and this person is also interested in gardening and nature, and where they're based, there was this holly bush that had been sort of decimated by deer, but it was also covered by these other kinds of galls, like a lot of them. And so I got a picture of these galls, and they looked like rotten little cauliflowers. They were these strange things. And so for people who aren't familiar with galls, or maybe you're listening and you're not seeing, this is, I think, a pine gall that Sean sent. And so you can see the branch on either side, and then around it is this, it's actually hard like wood, it's not squishy, protuberance, like bulbous protuberance, where the cells of the branch have been reformatted to create, essentially, I think it's like a little house for larvae for a certain kinds of, I don't know if it's exclusively, but I know that there are wasps that are teeny tiny, like gall wasps are maybe 1 millimeter, I read, to 8 millimeters, so not very big wasps that can, through some mechanism, communicate with the cells of a plant, whether on a leaf or on a stem, and transform the developmental process of the cells in that part of the plant as a little factory to make something else, right? A little house for their larvae to grow in. And I think that's pretty fascinating. And another person who thinks that this is really fascinating is Michael Levin. And as you know, I've been following Michael Levin's work for the past 2 or 3 years. I can't remember. I think maybe Leo introduced me to Michael Levin. And he's I'm trying to think of like what his background is. I don't know if it's like biophysics or at Tufts University in Boston. And what Levin is interested in is looking at sort of morphogenesis, right? The collective intelligence of cells, and how decentralized electrical pulsing and blueprints can be used to change the physical presentation and development of material bodies. And these changes that he talks about, he initially worked a lot with flatworms, planaria, reprogramming one-headed flatworms, which have no central nervous system or brain. They're decentralized intelligence, into a two-headed model, and getting these flatworms to hold 2 electrical blueprints for itself, one-headed and two-headed. And when they were injured, the one-headed planaria, the 2 pieces that were left would become, well, I guess one would become two-headed and one would become one-headed. And then maybe if that one-headed one got chopped again, it would be the same. And there would always be like one left over, one-headed, and the two-headed would come out of the other shorter bit. So he's interested in this morphospace. And then he was also he had worked in the development of these artificial robots, the xenobots, made out of frog cells. And he and various research colleagues have been doing a lot with manipulating embryos, and manipulating them not through genetic engineering, which is what most people talk about, but manipulating them through electrical impulses. And one of the things that I found really fascinating was he has, a whole cadre of graduate students working with him. And there was a woman who was doing work in his lab, which is represented as a centaur, right? These chimeras. And she was working on something with embryos, I'm assuming frog embryos or something, and then they would introduce a disruptor to the petri dish where the embryos were. They call it a teratogen. And when she had a few embryos in a dish, pretty much none of them would survive the disruption. But after some advice from another colleague, she started to put more and more of these embryos in the dish, which seems somewhat counterproductive because you would think overcrowding would lead to worse outcomes. But as it turned out, the more they put in, like 50 or up to 300 of these embryos in a petri dish, the better the outcomes were. And it appeared that these emergent, life forms were interfacing with some quantum information field for a solution to the disruption problem that they were encountering that threatened their survival. And then collectively, this wisdom of the crowd, someone would get a solution that would work, and then they would distribute that solution energetically throughout the other members of the petri dish and sort of resolve the problem. And so it was kind of creating this collective problem-solving system, a decentralized intelligence system that was working electrically with the field. And so if you understand like non-local consciousness, non-local information access, then the fact that Levin is overlapping now with the Friston free energy principle, active inference folks, and he and I have mentioned before, I think it's Richard A. Watson, they're with this project called the Center for Apparent Selves. And so they're trying to figure out what the self is and where the self, what is the container of the self, and that different life forms have they're collections of intelligences, some of which, like I've said before, like the microbiome. We're this hollow biont. People are walking around hollow bionts, in which some of us is something that we would consider us, but then there's all of the other microbes that live in us or on us that are also semi-us, like us adjacent, right? But what Levin is sort of even poking around at is that in a multicellular organism, individual cells themselves are kind of their own organism, but they are encompassed under an umbrella to be a certain part of a larger structural system, a differentiated structural system, so that they sort of forget that they're independent, and then they submit to the overall program of like whether you're a liver cell or a brain cell or a red blood cell or these various things so there's this dual identity. There's this suppressed identity of you as an independent being, and then you're suppressed within the collective of what part of the tissue of this larger holobiont system are you, and then you do that. And so what he's interested in is maybe reawakening that latent understanding of individual process and using that to explore novel alternatives. And so this sort of fits in with his theory that cancer is actually an electrical problem, that cancer are these cells that wake up and remember that they're their own thing, and they're like, I'm out of this program, and they start doing their own thing that is somewhat often counter to what the body as a whole needs to stay in homeostasis is the cancer. And so you could sort of see this gall, like these, tumas, that the gall would be like a cancer that because there was a bioprompt from this wasp, which I guess in this case it would be parasitic. I don't know that the plant benefits from these galls. I don't think that the galls necessarily kill the plant unless maybe they become overabundant. But that there is this prompt from an outside force that people don't quite understand yet, like how the wasps actually do these tiny wasps to make these bulbous protuberances, but they wake up some of these cells and they get them to do something different. And so he's very interested in that. And then that sort of is like, well, what if all of our cells woke up and decided to do something different? It would be quite scary, and we would have no coherence. So it's sort of this balance of personal coherence, electrodynamics, how things hang together in the program, how us as individuals hang together within the larger culture program. And this is a theme that's touched on, this will be backwards for you, but it's Neil Stephenson's book, Fall or Dodge in Hell. And this one I bought used, so it doesn't have a dust jacket. But Neil Stephenson's Fall is essentially about a programmer, game designer, who signs a contract in the 90s with cryogenics people and has his head cut off and frozen when he dies, and then emerges in this other new kind of morphospace, trying to develop his own consciousness from chaos and then develop a body that goes along with this consciousness. And then there are later participants who got frozen who follow, but the later ones actually had their whole bodies frozen. And so when they came into the Morphospace, they came in with a predetermined body, like a human looking body. But the people who came in as just heads kind of had to make up a body, so their body was like more fluid. And so I think that weirdly, the fall in the fluid bodies is kind of like this gall. Like, what are we? What can we explore? And there's some people, and I can't remember the woman's name. She's a high level mathematical theorist, and she's with the Active Inference Institute exploring art and math. And so she's done quite a bit on shape shifting. And so again, are we our body? Are we not our body? For me personally, I have some issues with disembodiment because I think actually intelligence in a body is super important. If it turns out that my strange thought experiment that what we may be sort of stumbling into is a two-phase collective distributed processing system where there's some sort of remote out-of-body astral projection into infospace, like the little eggs in the petri dish, and they're like, help me, there's a problem, go get the information, right? And so there's a projection not of their physical little lumpy, squishy bodies, but their actual intelligence, the intelligence of the cell to get information, but then it comes back into the embodied embryo, and then from that embryo spreads collectively throughout the community. And so I think the body part is another important part of the processor, because then there's additional processors in us that are the bacterial and microbial and fungal components that are in us and on us, which is interesting because I'm heading out to the compost pile, and it's its own. When I go this time of year, like it's steamy, right? When you dig into composting leaf mulch, that is its own intelligence, that pile. And so it's interesting when you try on this lens of like, what is an intelligence and where does it live? There's a lot of other opportunities opening up. So there's a long paper by Michael Levin for the NIH about galls, and it's pretty extensive, and I'm debating about reading it and doing maybe some commentary on it, and I'm gonna have to get through the whole thing and sort of figure out, maybe I can print it out and find out just the parts that are particularly compelling for me. But I wanted to do sort of this introduction just to an idea, because part of the changing or awakening the cell is a little bit like the Gurdjieff theorization that we're all in a sleepwalking state and we don't remember what we are. And most of us go through our whole life not really knowing what we are. We're sort of living in a lucid dream, but there's something else. There's something else. And that's kind of, I think, what Levin might be getting at with cells within a multicellular organism, is that most of their life, they don't really know what they are. And they're living in the lucid dream of, I am part of the liver, or, I am part of a kidney, or something like that. And they don't realize that maybe they have this past trajectory of like being an independent object. They could go make galls or cancer or some other kind of morphospace. And what Levin's interested in, based on what his talks are things like, regrowing legs on, people who've lost appendages or things like that. Not unlike the little, the little lizards. I want to say axolotl or the Mexican ones, but the other, the little ones that they can lose their leg and then come back. Or if you're a kid and you're up to age 8, you can lose the tip of your finger and it will grow back. That thing, like how to activate that thing. And so it's something about the interaction between a physical body and infospace and morphospace. And so, I'll just close out with pointing out this is a, I don't have Facebook, but sometimes you can Google things and Facebook pages come up, and if they're public, you can access them. So this is a Facebook page, and it says May 9th, but I don't know if this was this past May 9th. I think Levin's interest in galls is fairly recent, but it's from the Air Force Office of Scientific Research. And it says, Michael Levin, Allen Discovery Center at Tufts University, galls, bioprompting of plant cells to explore latent morphospace. This is a photo of a plant gall. A tall, round, red shape can be produced by cells which normally make a flat green leaf without genetic editing by a set of chemical and biophysical signals from an insect parasite. We can similarly learn to reprogram the collective intelligence of cells during morphogenesis if we understood how this bioprompting works, which would lead to unprecedented control of growth and form, which in turn would facilitate a lot of Department of Defense priority applications in biotechnology. So I mean, I think most people would see this and they would like totally panic in terms of like framing this within some sort of a bioweapon program. And I keep saying, I don't think we really understand the weapons, and I don't think we really understand the nature of the engagement that we're in. I'll just repeat, and I could be incorrect, but my assessment is this is not about eliminating people. This is not a Georgia Guidestone situation, and it's not even about homogenizing people or making them all the same. It's kind of like waking them up to their human potential, which is embodied psychic potential. So it's the psychic potential that lives in a quantum processing body, of which that's all run on electricity. It's all the electromagnetism. And it's interesting that this is out of the Air Force, because the Air Force is really the leader in human-machine interface. And they were the lead, back in the post-World War II era, in these supersonic flights, of how you meld the person into the machine, right? Like the pilot into the cockpit, having a seamless interface, which we can now sort of picture how this works with augmented reality and haptics, is how do you extend, whether the person is a prosthetic to the airplane or the airplane is a prosthetic to the person. It is this melding, right? And as we move forward into this consciousness realm, right? And I guess I keep saying I think it's way more inner space than outer space, that the Air Force would be interested in, so the bioprompting applications of the body. Again, I don't think it's to turn us into a lump of cancer. I don't think it's like, oh, we're going to fly over and drop, which they have, there's been a lot of spraying things the Air Force has done within the Manhattan Project and in other nuclear testing things where they've dropped various things on unknowing populations in a not a good way. So I don't mean to any way dismiss that or say that's okay. It's not, but I don't think that's the goal. I think somehow the weapons are more psychotronic weapons, and I think the engagement is then more developing this global processor, because I think personally many of the stories about geopolitics and these various conflicts are to keep people inflamed in their various, and keep the disruption going on, where behind the scenes, the emergence of the noosphere, that the powers that be at the highest levels know that they're all on the same page with what this emergent global bioprocessor is. And so there's many, not to say in any way that wars and bombings and economic devastation or weather devastations or other things are to be dismissed as not significant for the people affected. But I think the stories and the narratives that go along with them are very much about managing consciousness. And so what they're trying to figure out is, again, how does it work under the hood? How does the embodied consciousness work under the hood? What signaling do we need? And this is all signals intelligence, which is the digital economy. The digital economy attached to wearables and phones is the signaling system. And so they're trying to figure out, how do the wasps get the plants or the leaves or the branches to do that, to create something useful for its purpose, which is to have a larvae evolve and turn into the next generation of wasps. They are trying to figure out how to use electrical impulses through the wearables at a global scale, but nested, fractal within holons, right? Your chosen community, and then those communities under larger and larger nested umbrellas till we get to the whole world. And how do we turn that into the processor? But it's somehow about this morphospace and non-local consciousness, which is, again, why when you look at Levin and you see things like, okay, they're working with flatworms and electrical blueprints. Okay, they're working on ancient Nepalese spiritual ritual and AI. Okay, now they're working in xenobots, running fitness landscapes to create new forms of life and new sort of physical space. And so they are exploring morphospace, which in my mind is also infospace. And the consciousness is key to that, how the consciousness is attached into the body, and then what affordances does the body give or not give, and how shape-shifting might provide other affordances. I think that this is all part of things that we should be thinking about. And if you consider like morphospace being physical space, like changing again a flat leaf into a gall, but then there's also consciousness space, which is based on information consumption. And so I would say just consider things like Substack as signaling for infospace. I don't know what this thing is. So I guess my hand motions triggered the fireworks. Sorry about that. I guess I'm a magic person, right? But so the consider in consciousness being managed by memetics and meme coins and infospace, and how those mind viruses are transmitted through the field, our individual consciousness, and how these group us, and then again prompt us to explore other information avenues. So I'm not saying I'm out of this here. I'm offering you a prompt about galls, right? And you could call this a rabbit hole, and for some people it might be a rabbit hole, and that might be a good thing or a bad thing. But I'm offering a prompt to say, hey, maybe we need to consider distributed embodied intelligence and bioprompting and exploration of latent morphospace and galls, and how that might be part of the equation behind the DoD intention, which there's tons of people in the resistance who want to talk about bioweapons, right? Tons of people who are talking about that, but they're not really talking about it the way we're talking about it here, which is about awakening consciousness of individual cells under the umbrella of a larger program, and then steering them in some sort of other direction. And, I did have somebody recently mentioned nudges again and again. I've been talking about nudges for a long time, but I didn't have the scaffolding to consider some of the breadth of other possibilities of nudging. And I think nudging could be bioprompting, right? I mean, I think this idea of creating a fitness landscape with an outside-in robot that's, again, not confining you, not pulling your strings and making you do exactly what it wants, but giving these guide rails that you're bumping around against towards a certain destination, which is the cybernetics. And all of that happening within tokenization and digital money, including community currencies that are going to be coming on board with the, sacred money, Charles Eisenstein, sacred economics, and I'm sure, Bobby and who knows where Catherine Ross's voice is going to come out on there. She seems to waffle back and forth on the digital money, as long as it's not a CBDC. But like, how about digital community currency? If it's a part of the gall making program and the biosuperorganism, like, and again, I don't even know that this is terrible. I mean, it's kind of fascinating. Again, your people's initial inclination might be like, oh, terrible. Let me tell you how terrible it is. And I'm not saying it's great. I'm just saying, like, pause, put the emotion on the shelf for a little bit, and just like be in that space of like, let's look under the hood. Let's see what they're looking at, because we're not going to be able to make good strategic or informed consent decisions unless we also know how it works under the hood. So I'm here to say I think galls is part of it. And so thank you very much, Sean, for sending me the gall, and synchronously with my other friends sending me gall pictures on the holly tree, which is interesting. Holly has a certain symbolism too, I think. And yeah, both evergreens, now that I think about it. Immortality, which is, again, part of the fall, the dodge in hell. And now I'm going to go out and commune with the compost. And it's really nice. I've been digging in my backyard, and I thought there really wasn't any life in the soil back there, which kind of bummed me out. And I was going to do raised beds anyway, but then I wanted to expand for flowers. And so I started digging in the topsoil, and we had a really good rain last week. So actually there's a ton of earthworms. So I'm really happy. And the little girl who lives across the backyard, she comes over and plays in the dirt with me. And she's alternately like fascinated and horrified by the earthworms, but she would pick them up and go put them in another part of the garden bed. And that's good. Like we're all sharing this intelligence of the soil. And, as I've mentioned to Sean before, I said, I'm not sure that soil isn't being the boss of us. And I'm not sure if that's good or bad. I just sent somebody a thing about reminding them about Crombie and elementals and Findhorn or Findhorn. And the jury's still out for me on that. I have a lot of questions, but clearly there's something about permaculture and this electrical signaling that is important in this story. So stay tuned, and maybe I'll get back to actually reading through that full gall paper and pulling out some juicy bits to share. All right, bye.